They say memory fades with time. But what if it doesn't? What if it waits, buried beneath ivy and stone, whispering through the trees of a place the world forgot? Hawthorne House has stood silent for decades. Elite, untouchable. Haunted by rumors of missing students and locked doors no one dares open, until now. When a journalist arrives under a false name, she's not just chasing a cold case, she's walking straight into a living memory, one with roots that twist through history and vines that won't let go. Because some gardens were never meant to be grown, they were meant to keep secrets. The gates of Hawthorne House creaked open with a groan that sounded like a warning as Ivy Lang stepped from the Blacktown car, her boots crunching on gravel still wet from the early morning rain. Ivy adjusted the thin, gold-rimmed glasses that completed her carefully constructed persona. Miss Elaine Grant, alumni liaison from the Independent School Journal, a title forged with just enough real credentials and polished lies to grant her access. The sprawling estate rose ahead like a half-forgotten fairy tale, ivy-covered stone walls, Gothic spires, and windows that watched her like eyes. It had been 10 years since Julian Maddox's younger sister, Lila, vanished from this very place. And though the world had moved on, Ivy hadn't. She'd read the file over and over. Lila's disappearance buried beneath academic scandals, faculty reassignments, and one line that always stuck out. Student may have wandered into restricted woodland area and succumbed to exposure, but that was nonsense, and Ivy knew it. Now, Hawthorne had another problem, a second student missing just 2 weeks ago, and whispers among the staff said it happened near the same garden Lila had been obsessed with. That's why Ivy was here. Her source inside the school had warned her, don't ask about the garden, don't go near it, and whatever you do, don't mention Julian Maddox, which meant that was exactly where she'd start. As she crossed the threshold into the main hall, the atmosphere shifted like the school itself was exhaling, sizing her up. A tall woman with frost-pale hair greeted her with a tight smile. Ivy recognized her instantly from her research. Headmistress Adrienne Locke, a woman known for her poise and her iron grip on reputation. Welcome to Hawthorne, she said, voice smooth as glass. You're just in time for the founder's ceremony tomorrow. Ivy returned the smile, polite and shallow, but her mind was already turning. Founder's Day meant guests, movement, distraction, and maybe a chance to slip away into the woods. She glanced once toward the east wing windows, just for a second. Far beyond them, through the mist, she could make out the edge of the forestand, a wrought iron gate overgrown with vines. Something about it made her stomach twist, not in fear, but recognition. She didn't know why. Not yet. But she would, because the story wasn't just buried out there in the trees. It was waiting. The next morning, Hawthorne House was dressed in nostalgic grandeur. Brass chandeliers gleamed overhead. Fresh ivy was woven into the railings of the grand staircase, and students in immaculate uniforms filled the halls with polite murmurs, laughter, and the occasional sideways glance at the unfamiliar guest, with the press badge clipped neatly to her lapel. Ivy moved through the crowd like a phantom, unseen in plain sight, her eyes absorbing everything. The headmistress's tight control over the staff, the curiously absent groundskeeper who'd been listed in every file related to Lila Maddox, and the wing of the school that had been under renovation for years. But it was during the founder's ceremony, seated among donors and board members in the candlelit chapel, that Ivy saw him. Julian Maddox. Taller than the photo in her dossier, his once boyish face now angular with age and something colder. Loss, perhaps, but his eyes still burned with the same stubborn fire she'd seen in old yearbook clippings. He hadn't noticed her yet. Dressed in a dark suit with no tie, his posture was relaxed but guarded, the way people sat when they didn't want to be noticed, but expected to be. And for a man who'd famously never returned to Hawthorne since his sister vanished, his presence set the room buzzing beneath the surface. Ivy didn't approach him yet. She waited and watched as he stood when Headmistress Locke spoke his name. We welcome back Julian Maddox, Hawthorne alum and generous donor, whose family's legacy continues to shape this institution. The applause was brief, polite, and hollow. Julian didn't speak. He simply nodded, gaze flicking up, just once, to the second-floor balcony where Lila had last been seen. then back down. When the ceremony ended, Ivy made her move, following him through the corridor that led to the gardens. "Mr. Maddox," she called softly, slipping beside him. "Elaine Grant, Independent School Journal." He paused, slowly turning, his expression unreadable. "You're not press," he said immediately. "At least not the kind they usually invite to this place." Ivy didn't flinch. "And you're not here to donate money." He smirked at that. And for a moment, something behind his guarded exterior cracked. "You're here about Lila," he said flatly. Ivy nodded once. "And the girl who went missing 2 weeks ago." He exhaled sharply. "Then you're already in danger." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "They'll pretend it's just a myth, just a garden with no gate, but it's real. And once you step inside, it doesn't let you forget." Ivy's pulse quickened. "You've been there." "I don't remember," Julian said. "But I wake up every night thinking I do." He glanced behind them. "Meet me after lights out, by the sundial behind the East Conservatory." And with that, he was gone. Ivy stood in place, heart pounding. The garden had just opened its door, and Julian Maddox was stepping back into it, with her. Long after the students had gone quiet and the candlelit windows of Hawthorne House blinked out one by one, Ivy slept from her guest room, her footsteps soft against the worn wooden floorboards, careful not to alert the ever-watchful night staff. Dressed in black and armed only with a flashlight, her press ID tucked away, she crept through the East Conservatory, where the old vines curled along the windows like skeletal fingers. Outside, the night air was damp and thick, with a scent of moss and old earth. She stepped into the garden path and paused beside the ancient sundial, its brass surface tarnished, the hour markers worn smooth by time. A shadow moved near the hedges. "You're late," Julian murmured, stepping from the dark, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. He wore a dark coat and gloves, and in one hand he held a rusted key. "This was Lila's," he said, offering it to her. "I found it after she vanished. It was hidden inside the spine of her Latin textbook. Took me years to realize what it unlocked." Ivy turned the key over in her palm, the metal cold and impossibly heavy. "What's beyond the gate?" she asked. Julian hesitated. "I don't know. I don't remember going. But I've dreamed of it. A tall iron gate smothered in ivy. A tunnel of trees. Voices calling from deep inside, not whispers, names." They walked together down an overgrown stone path behind the greenhouse, past a fountain long choked with algae and leaves, until they reached a wall nearly swallowed by nature. There, hidden beneath decades of growth, was a gate, twisted iron covered in vines, the shape of roses and thorns woven into the metal. A sign above it, barely legible, read, "Veritas Hortus," the Garden of Truth. Ivy cleared away the vines, revealing a keyhole hidden beneath rust and roots. The moment she inserted the key, a low grinding echoed through the air, as if the garden itself was stirring awake. The gate creaked open an inch, no more, as if inviting rather than allowing. "I feel like I've been here before," Ivy whispered. Julian looked at her sharply. "Have you?" She shook her head, but deep inside, she wasn't sure. Something about the air, the scent of the earth, the hum in her spine. It felt familiar. As they pushed the gate open fully and stepped inside, the wind shifted. The air was strangely warm, the temperature entirely different from the chill of the night behind them. The trees were impossibly tall, the leaves thick and dark, and the path ahead twisted in ways that made no logical sense. Somewhere in the distance they heard a chime, a bell that wasn't part of the school, and then a whisper. Not wind, not birds, a whisper of a name. Julian's eyes went wide. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Ivy nodded slowly. It said, "My name." Behind them, the gate slammed shut on its own. The sound of the gate slamming behind them echoed through the twisted canopy like a warning bell. But it wasn't just the noise that sent a chill down Ivy's spine. It was the sudden silence that followed. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just the heavy, unnatural stillness of a place unaccustomed to visitors. The air inside the garden was denser, scented with something floral and decaying, like jasmine left too long in the sun. Ivy turned, grabbing the gate's bars, but it wouldn't budge. The key no longer fit the lock. "We're not leaving this way," she whispered, heart pounding. Julian stood a few feet ahead, staring down a narrow path lined with thorny hedges that arched overhead like a cathedral made of shadows. "This path, it changes," he murmured. "When I dreamed it, it was straight. Now it bends." Ivy stepped beside him, trying to push down the flutter of nerves, but the whispers returned low, melodic voices murmuring just beneath the edge of hearing. She could almost make out syllables, as if the trees themselves were trying to speak. They walked in silence. The lantern Julian had brought casting long shadows across gnarled roots and stone tiles etched with Latin phrases she didn't recognize. The path forked several times, yet each time they chose a direction, the garden seemed to close behind them, hedges reshaping, flowers shifting to follow. Ivy felt it in her chest. They were being led. At the center of the path, they found it, a crumbling stone pedestal topped with a broken sundial, identical to the one near the conservatory. Only this one was etched with initials, L.M. Julian stepped back as if struck. "Lila Maddox," Ivy said softly, brushing her fingers across the cold stone. She was here. Julian nodded slowly, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I didn't show you this before." It was an old page, torn from Lila's journal. The ink faded but still legible. "I saw the girl again today, beneath the bell tree. She says the garden shows you the truth, but only if you survive it." Ivy read it twice, then turned to Julian. "Who's the girl?" Julian shook his head. "She used to mention her in dreams. Said she wore a uniform, but no one remembered her." Just then, the bell rang again, louder now, deeper and much closer. They turned slowly. In the distance, a tree stood in unnatural bloom, covered in bone-white flowers, its trunk wound with rusted chimes that swayed though there was no breeze. Beneath it stood a girl. Her hair was dark, her posture still, her face turned toward them, but her features were blurred, almost like water behind glass. "Do you see her?" Ivy whispered. "Yes," Julian replied, "but I don't think she's really here." The girl raised her hand slowly, pointing not at Julian but at Ivy. The voices rose. A rush of wind swirled around them, and for the briefest second, Ivy saw something in the girl's place. A vision, herself as a child, standing at the edge of a field, and in her hand was a key. "I've been here before," she breathed. Julian turned to her, eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" I don't know how, but I have." The bell tree chimed once more, and the vision vanished. But the path ahead opened again. And now Ivy knew something she hadn't before. The mystery of Lila's disappearance wasn't the only reason she was here. The garden had been calling her long before Julian ever knew her name. The path narrowed, drawing Ivy and Julian deeper into a section of the garden untouched by sunlight. The trees grew so closely together here that their branches formed a ceiling, their twisted limbs knitted like bone. Ivy's flashlight flickered once, twice, and then died completely. Julian's lantern gave off a dull orange glow, its flame bending as if pulled by an unseen current. "This doesn't make sense," Ivy whispered, her voice swallowed by the overgrown silence. "We haven't turned, but we've been walking for nearly 20 minutes. Julian nodded grimly. "Time works differently here. I remember. Moments stretching, days blinking by." Lila said the garden reflects memory. Ivy looked at him sharply. "Memory?" He hesitated. "Or regret, whichever hurts more." A sharp rustling interrupted them. A whisper, close now, circling. Ivy spun around, and there, just a few feet behind them, stood the girl. Pale uniform, long dark hair hanging wet against her face, bare feet on moss-covered stones. Her eyes were dark hollows, emotionless, ancient. Ivy stepped forward, heart thudding. "Who are you?" she asked. The girl tilted her head, then slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph. Ivy took it with trembling hands. It was old, water-stained, but clear enough to see. A group of girls in school uniforms, all smiling. One of them was Lila. One of them was Ivy. She gasped. "This isn't possible. I've never been here before. I didn't attend Hawthorne." But the image didn't lie. It was her, younger, maybe 12 or 13, standing in the back row with a familiar expression of discomfort. Julian stepped beside her, staring at the photo. "You were a student here?" "No," Ivy insisted. "I wasn't. My parents would have." But then it hit her. A year she couldn't remember. A hospital stay. A private tutor. Her mother's face when she'd asked about the missing months. The girl took a step closer. Her lips moved, but no sound came. She pointed again, this time toward the rose-covered arch at the end of the path. Ivy barely registered Julian calling after her as she moved toward it. Drawn like a string was pulling her forward. Beyond the arch, the garden opened into a circular clearing, overgrown but beautiful in its chaos. In the center stood a statue, half cracked, of a young girl holding a key in one hand and a bell in the other. The plaque below it was eroded, but Ivy could just make out two words: "For her." Something shifted in Ivy's mind, like a curtain being pulled back. Flashes of a girl named Emily, her roommate. A whisper at night. A dare to go into the garden. Screams. Hands grabbing her in the dark. A secret buried in the soil. She stumbled backward. Julian caught her before she fell. "What is it?" he asked, alarmed. I think I was here," she whispered. "I think I blocked it out." And the worst part wasn't the realization. It was the feeling that something or someone had wanted her to forget. The girl with the dark hair was gone now, vanished into the leaves. But Ivy was beginning to understand the truth. Lila's disappearance was just the beginning, and Ivy Lang wasn't investigating this mystery. She was part of it. They returned to the main path in silence, the kind that hummed with questions neither of them was ready to ask. Ivy's hand still trembled where she clutched the faded photograph, her long coat brushing leaves that reached like fingers from the hedgerows. Julian kept glancing at her, as if waiting for her to speak, to confirm what he'd seen in her face the moment she looked at that photo. Recognition, not just of the place, but of herself within it. "You should have told me," he finally said. "If you had a connection to this place?" "I didn't know," she snapped, harsher than she meant. "I didn't remember. Not until now." Her voice dropped as she added, "Maybe that's what the garden does. It buries what hurts." Julian slowed beside her, his lantern catching on something in the dirt. He crouched, brushing away leaves to reveal a rusted metal ring embedded in the ground. A trapdoor, the kind that wasn't listed on any of the blueprints they'd studied. "Underground tunnel?" Ivy asked. Julian nodded once. "I think Lila mentioned this in her journal. She called it the vein. Said it ran beneath the garden like roots. They pried it open, the hinges shrieking as stale air rolled out like a breath long held. Inside, a stone staircase winding downward into pitch black. Without a word, they descended. The temperature dropped with each step. The only light was the soft orange flicker of Julian's lantern and the pale glow from Ivy's backup flashlight. The tunnel was narrow, its walls carved with old Latin inscriptions, and then graffiti, familiar names, slurs, threats. "These are from students," Ivy murmured, tracing a name she remembered from the headmistress's disciplinary files. "Expelled for misconduct." Further in, the graffiti changed. The writing turned frantic. "Don't listen to the flowers. The girl in the mirror lies. I see my face, but it isn't mine." Ivy felt her skin crawl. Then they found the door. It was wooden, reinforced with iron, and smeared with something dark that looked like blood but smelled like paint. Symbols were scrawled across it, childlike spirals and sunbursts, but all twisted inward. Julian hesitated, hand on the latch. "What if we find her?" he asked quietly. "Lila?" Ivy's voice was a whisper. "Or what's left of her?" The door creaked open. Beyond it was a room, small, cold, and empty, save for a single broken cot, a school uniform hanging on the wall, and hundreds of pressed flowers scattered across the floor. Pinned to the ceiling above the cot were dozens of Polaroids, girls smiling, crying, sleeping, some with faces crossed out in red. In the center of them all was a single image of Lila Maddox. Not smiling, not afraid, just blank, as if she knew the photo would one day be used to haunt someone. Ivy stepped closer and found something beneath the mattress, an envelope sealed in wax. She cracked it open with shaking fingers and pulled out a note in Lila's sharp, looping handwriting. "I tried to remember what they did to us, but the garden took it from me. If someone finds this, tell Julian I fought it. I really did. But some things can't be dug up. They have to be burned. Suddenly, the lantern sputtered. Footsteps echoed above them, multiple sets, not in rhythm, and Ivy realized with a jolt. They weren't alone in the garden anymore. The footsteps above weren't fast, but they were deliberate, calculated, heavy, like someone walking a path they already knew by heart. Ivy instinctively switched off her flashlight, plunging the tunnel into darkness broken only by the dim orange flicker of Julian's lantern, now cupped tightly in his hands. "We need to hide," she whispered, already moving toward the far side of the small underground chamber. Julian hesitated, casting one last look at the photo of Lila pinned overhead, then followed. They pressed themselves into a shadowed alcove between crumbling stone and a collapsed storage shelf as the door creaked open once again, not loudly, but carefully, like someone easing into a room they had no right to enter. A silhouette appeared in the doorway, not one of the teachers, not a student. A man, older, thin, his face partially covered by a scarf and hood. But Ivy recognized the walk, the uneven step, the slight tremor in his left hand. "The groundskeeper," she whispered. "That's Emery Tate." Julian's eyes widened. He disappeared the same week Lila did. Everyone thought he fled. Emery moved with a quiet urgency, crossing the room and kneeling beside the broken cot. From his coat, he pulled out a metal box and opened it with a key worn down to almost nothing. Inside, tapes. Old cassette tapes, dozens of them, labeled only by dates. Ivy strained to read them. One caught her eye. The 3rd of April, LM interview. Her heart skipped. The day before Lila vanished. Emery turned suddenly, looking directly toward their hiding place. Ivy froze, but he didn't move closer. Instead, he whispered to the empty room, "She's coming back, just like before." Then, slowly, he turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. They waited a long minute before moving. Julian was the first to break the silence. He was recording them, he said. Interviews, maybe interrogations. Lila said in her journal that someone in the school was trying to extract memories. What if it was him? Ivy's pulse was pounding. She reached for the box. The tapes were cold, dusty, but untouched for years. She shoved several into her bag, then paused as her fingers brushed something at the bottom. A notebook, bound in worn red leather. She opened it and felt her breath catch. Drawings, maps of the garden, notes scrawled in frantic ink. The girl with no name is the key. If she remembers, the loop will break. Ivy closed the book, the air suddenly feeling tighter around her. "We have to go," she said. "We take the tapes, we listen, and we find out who's really running this place." But as they climbed the steps back to the surface, the night had changed. The air was thicker. The paths were wrong. Trees had moved. Vines now covered signs that had been clear before. The garden had shifted again, reorganizing itself. And for the first time, Ivy felt not just watched, but hunted. They broke into a run, guided only by instinct and Julian's weak lantern light, until they stumbled out into a clearing Ivy didn't recognize. An open circle of carved stones and old benches. And sitting on one of them, calmly waiting, was the girl, the one with the blurred face. Only this time, her features were clear. Young, with long dark hair, dark eyes, and a small scar at her temple. "I remember you," Ivy said, breathless. "Your name is Emily." The girl nodded once, slowly. "You left me here." The garden went completely silent, and Ivy felt the weight of guilt she didn't know she carried slam into her chest. The silence in the clearing was suffocating, not just from the stillness of the air, but from the look in Emily's eyes, dark, searching, unforgiving. Ivy's legs locked. Her breath caught somewhere between shock and shame. "I didn't know," she whispered, stepping closer, her voice trembling. "I was just a kid. I didn't even remember being here until yesterday." Emily tilted her head slightly, like a curious bird, her long dark hair swaying as she moved. "But I did. I remembered everything. Every night you stopped coming to the fence. Every time you looked away. Every time they came for me." Julian stood silently behind Ivy, clearly unnerved but unsure. If he was seeing a ghost, a hallucination, or something worse. Ivy clenched her fists. What did they do to you? Emily turned her gaze to Julian. Your sister tried to help me. She remembered me when no one else did. But it wasn't enough. The garden only lets one go at a time. She stepped forward now, barefoot over moss and petals, and something in the ground trembled with her steps. You were the one they picked to forget, she said, eyes on Ivy again. They erased me from your mind, made you believe you'd never even been here. You left, and they left me behind to feed the roots. Julian reached out. What is this place, Emily? What is the garden? Emily turned slowly, and her voice dropped to something quieter, almost reverent. It's not a place, it's a memory. A living one. The school built it over something old, older than any of them knew. When they found it, they tried to use it. They thought they could control it. She looked directly at Ivy now. But you can't control something that knows what you fear. The petals on the ground began to shift. Ivy watched in horror as the pressed flowers from below started to rise, curling in the air like they were breathing. The trees groaned overhead. The garden was responding. If this place feeds on memory, Ivy said, breath shaking, then we have to starve it. We have to take it all back, everything they tried to bury. Emily stepped backward, fading slightly at the edges, like smoke slipping through a crack. Then you need to go to the Chapel of Echoes, she said. It's where they recorded us, where the loop begins. Ivy blinked. Loop? But Emily was already gone. The clearing was empty again. And in the center of the stone circle, where Emily had stood, there now lay a key. Julian picked it up slowly, studying the inscription etched into the iron. Verum Orbis, the circle of truth. The moment he closed his hand around it, Ivy staggered backward, clutching her head. Images flooded her, snapshots like Polaroids tearing open in her mind. Her sitting in the chapel's pews, whispering secrets to Emily. Lila pacing in the garden with a notebook. A man's voice, Emery Tate's, asking questions she didn't understand. And someone else in the background, someone watching. Headmistress Locke. Ivy gasped. She knew. She was part of it. Julian nodded grimly. Then we confront her. But first, we finish what Lila started. They turned toward the darkened path. The trees didn't resist them this time, because the garden was no longer keeping them in. It was guiding them forward. The path to the chapel was one the school had long claimed didn't exist, but with the garden subtly shifting to reveal it, branches bending away, mist parting like curtains, Ivy and Julian found themselves standing before a structure so forgotten by time it looked more like a ruin than a sanctuary. Half covered in moss and thorned vines, the Chapel of Echoes stood crookedly beneath the moonlight, its stained glass windows long shattered, replaced by ivy-veined openings that breathed out stale air with every gust of wind. The heavy wooden doors hung open slightly, and a strange humming, low and rhythmic, pulsed from within. This is where they did it, Julian murmured, his voice tight. Where they rewrote us. Ivy's hand instinctively moved to the tapes in her bag, pressing against the weight of truth she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Still, she pushed the door open, and together they stepped inside. The interior was far too large for what the outside had suggested. The architecture made no sense. Pews spiraled in strange circular patterns. The altar twisted in design, with carved stone that looked more like ancient roots than holy decor. At the center of the chapel, where a cross might have once stood, was a giant iron machine, half-forgotten tech meshed with stained stone, its cables woven like tendrils into the floor and walls. All around it, mirrors stood propped in erratic positions, some cracked, others fogged, none of them reflecting exactly what was in front of them. As Ivy stepped closer, one of the mirrors flickered to life, and her breath caught. It showed her, young again, seated in a pew, whispering something to Emily. The girl's face was filled with fear, and Ivy's younger self looked over her shoulder at someone out of frame. They're coming, the reflection whispered. Don't let them take her. Julian approached a different mirror, and his hands clenched into fists as he watched himself, 17, panicked, dragging Lila by the wrist. We have to hide you, he was saying. They can't find you down there. Lila's face was streaked with tears. I don't want to forget, she told him. Promise you won't forget me. He whispered, I didn't. Not really. The machine in the center of the room crackled, drawing both their attention. A screen blinked to life. On it, Headmistress Locke's face, younger, calm, and chillingly clinical. Subject LM has shown increased resistance to the memory redirection protocol. Groundskeeper Tate believes proximity to Subject High is strengthening memory recall. Recommends separation in isolated sessions. Ivy's knees nearly buckled. She knew we remembered each other. That's why they erased us. They thought our connection would break the loop. The machine suddenly shuddered, gears inside spinning to life. One of the tapes in Ivy's bag was glowing faintly. The 3rd of April. LM interview. She pulled it out and stepped toward the device, finding a dusty old slot and sliding it in. The voice that played wasn't Lila's. It was Emery Tate's, calm and tired. "What do you remember about the garden, Lila?" Lila's voice came next. Steady, soft. It whispers. It warns. It remembers things I don't want it to, and it shows you the people you've lost. A pause. But it also shows you who's lying. Then her voice lowered, almost a whisper. "If you want to survive the garden, you have to leave someone behind." The tape clicked. The machine powered down, and every mirror in the chapel cracked at once. Ivy and Julian stood in a circle of broken glass, staring at a machine built not just to erase memory, but to reshape it, to trap it in loops, always returning, always eroding the truth. "It wasn't just them using it," Julian said slowly. "They were feeding it." Ivy turned, her voice hard now. "And I think Headmistress Locke is still feeding it." A slow clap echoed through the rafters. They both turned sharply. She stood in the doorway, elegant as ever, eyes cold, voice smooth. "I hoped you'd remember," said Adrian Locke. "It always works better when they remember first." Adrian Locke stepped fully into the chapel, her heels clicking softly against the cracked stone floor, as if the twisted architecture around her didn't belong to something broken but to something owned, claimed. She looked at the machine with a small, indulgent smile, and then at Ivy and Julian, like they were simply students who'd wandered into the wrong wing of the school. "This wasn't meant for you," she said calmly. "You weren't supposed to come back." Ivy stood tall despite the thundering in her chest. "You erased an entire generation of students. You buried memories, identities. You turned that garden into a trap." Adrian's head tilted slightly, her expression barely shifting. "The garden was always the trap, Miss Lang. We simply learned to survive it." Julian stepped forward, fury building. "You used Lila. You knew she was getting close to the truth." The headmistress gave a sad smile. Lila was brilliant, but she underestimated what remembering could do in a place like this. The garden doesn't tolerate disobedience. She took a few steps closer to the center, the humming of the machine rising subtly in her presence. "We didn't build the garden, you know. We found it. This land was never ours to tame. The earliest headmasters tried to wall it off, control it. But eventually we learned, better to feed it than fight it." Her gaze shifted to Ivy. "And you, my dear, you were always the strongest link. That's why you had to forget." Ivy's hands balled into fists. The mirrors around them still shimmered faintly with fractured reflections. Her, Emily, Lila, all frozen moments of fear and resistance. "You've been rewriting children's minds like they're data files," she said. "Why? What does the garden give you in return?" Adrian's smile finally cracked. "Peace, influence, longevity. This school thrives because of it. Every time someone disappears, the garden grows quieter, and the school grows more powerful." She turned back to the machine, stroking one of its polished metal edges. "It remembers so we don't have to." "You killed them," Julian said, his voice low. "You let it take them." "No," Adrian said softly. "They became it. Every forgotten student, every memory harvested. They're part of the garden now. And soon, you will be too." Before they could react, the machine pulsed with light. Ivy screamed as a searing pain tore through her head, memories colliding, fracturing, reversing. She saw Emily again, crying beneath the beltree. Saw herself as a girl backing away. Saw the moment she turned her back and ran. Julian fell to his knees, hands at his temples, gasping Lila's name. The mirrors lit up, flickering images looping, distorting. the machine was trying to erase them again. "No!" Ivy yelled, stumbling forward. With every ounce of strength, she reached into her bag and pulled the last tape, unlabeled, the one that had begun glowing as soon as they entered. She shoved it into the machine's reader and slammed the console. For a moment, nothing. Then, Lila's voice. "I remember now," she said. "I remember the deal they made. The girls who were taken, the ones who resisted. If you're hearing this, it means the garden still lives. It means she's still feeding it. And it means you have to finish what I couldn't." Adrian turned, face finally cracking with something real: fear. The mirrors exploded outward, shards flying like a burst of light. The machine shuddered violently. The floor split open beneath the altar, revealing a pit of tangled roots, writhing like veins. The garden screamed, not audibly, but through the very walls. A soundless quake of anguish and memory and rage. "Run!" Julian shouted, pulling Ivy back as the chapel collapsed inward. Adrian Locke remained where she stood, staring into the pit, murmuring one final sentence before the roots pulled her under. "You were supposed to forget." And then, she was gone. They ran, barely ahead of the collapsing chapel, as stone cracked and vines erupted from the floor like veins bursting through skin. The garden wasn't just reacting. It was reclaiming, pulling back every lie, every memory, every manipulated truth Hawthorne had buried for decades. Ivy and Julian pushed through thickening mist, past paths that now twisted violently around them, reshaping themselves faster than before. The trees whispered their names, not just Ivy and Julian, but Lila, Emily, and others. Dozens of voices tangled together in a rising chorus that didn't sound angry, but desperate. "It's pulling us back," Julian said, panting as they reached a stone archway they hadn't seen before. It stood in a clearing that pulsed with a low, deep hum, like a heartbeat echoing through the earth. The ground here was different, warm beneath their feet, soft, alive. "This is it," Ivy said, her breath catching. "This is where it began, the heart of the garden." A massive tree stood at the center of the clearing, impossibly tall, its bark black and slick like obsidian. Wrapped around its base were remnants of things from the school, ribbons from uniforms, broken frames, even notebooks. This was where the garden stored the truth, or more accurately, fed on it. "How do we stop it?" Julian asked. "We don't have the machine anymore, and Locke." "We don't need tech," Ivy said, stepping toward the tree. "We need to give it what it was denied, the memories they took." She reached into her bag, pulling the notebook from Emery Tate's bunker, the scattered tapes, the photograph Emily gave her, and most of all, the memory she'd tried so hard to suppress. As she laid the items at the base of the tree, the garden stilled. The wind paused. The mist pulled back. Ivy knelt, her hand pressed to the bark, and let the memories return. Her and Emily whispering in the dark, her turning away, the guilt, the silence. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember everything." The tree groaned. Its roots began to retreat from the clearing like an animal exhaling. And from the base, a door appeared. Small, wooden, childlike, like it had been built for someone much younger. "What is that?" Julian asked. Ivy stood slowly. "It's not for us," she said. "It's for the ones who never left." And then she saw them. Lila, Emily, the others, ghosts not of death but of memory, their forms faint and flickering. They stood on the edge of the clearing, no longer sad, no longer blurred, just waiting. One by one, they stepped through the door in the tree, not looking back. As the garden released them, let them go. Not trapped, not erased, but remembered. Lila paused at the threshold and looked at Julian, her lips parting in a smile that was small but real. Then she was gone, and the tree stilled. The garden sighed. The mist lifted completely, revealing Hawthorne House in the distance, quiet, untouched, normal. They had broken the loop. Julian turned to Ivy, his voice rough. "What now?" Ivy looked back at the path now, clear and straight. "Now we tell the truth. All of it." Morning broke over Hawthorne House with an unnatural stillness, as if the building itself was waking from a long, haunted sleep. The mist that had lingered around the grounds for generations was gone. burned away by golden light that finally reached the roots of the garden's secrets. Ivy stood at the edge of the eastern lawn, watching the forest with its twisted trees now soft in the sun, the once shadowed paths now quiet and clear. The gate to the garden had been blown open by the storm they'd triggered in the chapel, and now it stood rusted and still, no longer whispering, no longer watching. Just a gate, just a forest. But beneath it, Ivy knew, there were still echoes, the kind that wouldn't fade, only soften with time. Julian joined her in silence, the red notebook in his hand, its pages worn and smudged but whole. "The school board is coming tomorrow," he said quietly. "They'll want to shut everything down, demolish what's left." Ivy nodded, her eyes on the tree line. "They won't understand it. They'll think it was some mass delusion. Or trauma. Something convenient to bury again." He opened the notebook and turned to the last page. Lila had written on 4 words scrawled in faint ink: "Remember us without fear." He closed it gently, as if it were a living thing. "Do we tell them everything?" Ivy thought for a long time. "We tell them enough," she said. "But the truth, the real truth, that belongs to those who lost it, we carry it so they don't have to anymore." Later that afternoon, she walked the grounds one final time, past the sundial, past the fountain, past the cracked chapel that would be boarded up and declared off limits. She placed a single pressed flower, a white rose from the garden, on the old stone pedestal in the clearing where Emily had once stood. No voices answered, no illusions appeared, just wind and sun and silence. She turned back toward the house and paused when she saw a figure standing by the conservatory. A girl, young, uniform slightly too big, long, dark hair. She didn't speak, just smiled. And then vanished. Ivy exhaled slowly. The garden was no longer feeding, but it was still watching. Months later, an article appeared in a quiet publication. Hawthorne House, The Forgotten Years. Written by Ivy Lang. There were no photos, no names, but buried in the final paragraph, beneath facts and dates and carefully chosen words, was a single sentence in italics. "Some gardens grow flowers, others grow memory. The dangerous ones do both." And beneath, Thath handwritten, only on her personal copy, were 3 names: Lila, Emily, Ivy. Survivors. Not forgotten. Not anymore.